everyone. My name is Ayaka, and I will be doing the admissions coaching session here. And like I said a little bit earlier, during November, we are doing an essay writing series here in the admissions class. Last week, we had some technical difficulties, so I apologize we didn't have a class. But the week before, we started with how to choose a personal statement topic. And it's a lot to take in terms of choosing a personal statement topic. It's a lot to think about. So I do want to do a quick recap. And then today I would love to move on to kind of how to structure the ideas that are floating in your head. For those of you who are listening later on YouTube or on podcast, if you have any questions or you're like, you have some questions that you're dying to get answered, feel free to reach out to admissions@lsatunplugged.com, and we will collect all of that information and hopefully turn it into a class. If you're here in class, feel free to jump in with any questions you may have, questions, concerns, and also, this is your time to get personal feedback on, the thoughts that are floating in your head. Personal statements are really hard to kind of nail down into a draft. And I think from what I've seen this past year, looking at quite a few personal statements, the part that takes the longest is getting down that first draft. So hopefully this kind of motivates you a little bit to, voice some of those ideas, but also get yourself to put those thoughts into words onto paper. So just a quick recap of what we did the previous session. Let me just pull it up. Share my screen. Here we are. Hopefully you can see that. Let me pull it open. I'm not going to go through the whole thing again. But the main thing that I do want to get across is that, our personal statements, they are very, very broad, right? Most schools don't really have a prompt. If they do, it's a very broad prompt. It's also usually when I do interviews with admissions officers, they're usually looking to get to know who you are, which again, if you may be just out of college, or you may have had a 10, 15, 20-year career. And it's so hard to put all of that into 2 pages. So, which is the general length of the personal statement. So really it's important to kind of organize your thoughts. A lot of these are very, very common topics that we see across the board. And when I say common, that's not a negative thing. It's common because it's usually related to why someone's going or why someone is pursuing a legal career. So really, these are common. That's not a bad thing. It's the way that you organize your thoughts that matter. Again, when we talk about what needs to go in your personal statement, and there's always a story that you're like, okay, I really want to tell this story. That's the one that sits in the middle. And then also you were like, okay, I also need to talk about why law school, why this school is a fit for me. What value add are you bringing? What are your accomplishments? And you want to talk about all of those things. Granted, that's a lot to talk about. So my proposal is to really think about this personal statement, not in this way of centered around the story that you want to tell, but rather in a way where you're asking yourself, what do you want the law school admissions to know about you? And when we think of a personal statement in this way, sometimes you end up with a story, but more often than not, you're talking about characteristics about yourself that you want to highlight. And so when I ask students this question, usually people say, oh, I'm determined, I'm compassionate, I'm detail oriented. I can, I relate to people from two different cultures, and I understand how to connect the two. I, there's a lot of things that come out, but 90% of the time it's not, oh, my father's a lawyer, and so I want to be a lawyer. Like, that's not really what comes out. It's more characteristics about yourself that you really want to show admissions. So I think that's a better place to start when you start thinking about your personal statement. However, that is not the way that you might want to organize your essay. So when you think about a topic, think about what you want admissions to know about you, but that is not the guiding factor for structuring your essay. So just know that, and we'll talk a little bit more about structure in a minute. One of the other biggest things is we really want to know your why, right? What is the big why? What is the big motivation that is pushing you towards this career? Many times is a career shift. Those of you who've had a couple years of a career under your belt, this, there must have been a moment where it's like, this is the time, this is the moment, this is the reason. And what we really want to stay away from is kind of this, like, as a 5-year-old, I wanted to be a lawyer, and that's just never changed. Like, that is not the why that we're looking for. It's more, what is the deep-rooted, moving gear in this pursuit of this career. And I would frame this personal statement a little bit differently than from a undergrad personal statement. I say that this is a professional piece of writing. You are applying to a professional school, and so there is a purpose to the writing. Anyway, if you want to know more about that, take a look at that video from 2 weeks ago. We go a little bit deeper into this golden circle and the why. Lastly, I do want to touch on kind of the scopes of topics. This is a review, so I'm going to go through it quickly. I do find that most stories fall into either general, specific, or niche categories of topics. General is those really big events that everyone really, you don't need to explain too much for everyone to understand the context that you're talking about. So this year, or last spring, we did get a lot of essays about Black Lives Matter, COVID. Those were like the big topics that people were writing about. These are general topics that everybody went through COVID, so it's not difficult to understand what the hurdles were there, and there's not a lot of context you need to give for someone to understand COVID. So it's these big events. It's not a bad thing. There's just a couple caveats you need to make these essays work. Specific, these are a little bit more like life event sort of essays. Maybe your family was dealing with a legal issue, and that's where your interest started. Maybe you have work experience in the legal field, and I put that in the specific category because we are a self-selecting group of people who are applying to law school. So I think you're going to find people in the legal field more than in the general population. So that is in the specific field. It is a life experience. And because how you are relating to that profession may be different. It is a little bit more specific than the general. Maybe you had a life-changing event. Maybe you had, for example, also a specific category topic would be, you know, like something like a loss in the family or something like that. You know, a lot of people understand that the feeling of losing someone in the family, but it's your family and you relate to it in a very specific way. So that's why it's in this specific scope. Niche, this is where maybe 5 to 10% of essays hit. And this is more conducive to people who have a lot of work experience in a very niche field might sit. And I say this because niche topics require a lot of explanation to explain a very small piece of the story. And this is super difficult for people, myself included, who have a couple years of work experience, because you are an expert in your field, and dumbing down a story to make it fit into 2 pages is really, really difficult. And you have to let go of a lot of detail. You have to let go of kind of the expertise side, and you have to explain what is going on very concisely. So these are really difficult to write. And however, it shows your expertise and the level of person you are. These are very good for people who are making a career switch, for example, from a science-based or tech-based career to a legal career. This would be a great essay to write. None of these categories are wrong. It's just there are things that need to go into it to make it right, make it stronger. And if you want to know more about how to do that, the last iteration of this series touches on that. So I really want to talk about structure today. So let me mosey over here, sorry, to this blank piece of paper. So when I talk about a personal statement, I know we talked about this question of like, what do we want admissions to know about us or know about you, right? Sorry, let me make that font bigger. Excuse me. What do we want admissions to know about you? And many times, you know, we're here talking about compassion, empathy, detail-oriented, what else? Maybe experience, advocating, want to advocate, relate to people in legal lines, etc. Okay, so etc. These are the things that we want to talk about. These are the things that we want to include in the essay. However, do not make the mistake to say, okay, paragraph 1, we're going to talk about compassion. Paragraph 2, we're going to talk about empathy. Paragraph 3, I want to talk about wanting to advocate for people. This is not the way to go. We want to ignore this. And I'm like, where do I find the strike through? We will do that later. This is not the way to go. So I do think that elements of these things that we talked about that needs to go in an essay do need to be there. We probably can't talk in depth about all things, but we do want to talk about, you know, the why law school. We do want to hit on what you'll bring to the law school, depending on whether this is on your like top choice school, this may be like why you're a good fit for the school. That may be an important piece to include. I think this piece should be included for very specific schools, not all. So be very careful. But some of these things do need to be there. So, and we're talking about a narrative story. There needs to be some sort of narrative in there. We can't just say, I want to go to law school. This is why. Your school sounds great. Cool. Like, that's not the essay that we're looking for. We are looking for a narrative story that shows who you are as a person. Across the board, admissions is looking to get to know you better with this essay. So a lot of times this kind of throws people off, but the sections of your essay, I think at a very basic level should be hook, section 1 is narrative, and hook is also narrative. Section 2, narrative plus why law school or why legal career, right? We can look beyond the next 3 years and say, this is where I would like to be in my career. And that's, you see that narrative a little bit more in people who are making a career change. Section 3, maybe a little bit more narrative plus what you'll bring to the school or field, right? And then conclusion. So this is really what I would consider a starting ground. And what you will notice is that there is narrative in a majority of these sections. And that doesn't mean you need 4 different narratives. This should be one, maybe 2 narrative stories. So we do see essays that are like, my parents were in a legal bind, and that's the hook. And then they're talking about how they, started to get interested in the law, and took a couple classes, and then they did an internship. And it's too many stories, because you will spend the majority of your essay explaining the story. And really, what this hook, and should not be called a hook, it actually should be called intro to the narrative. This should really set up the narrative so that you can pull out strings to explain this, why law school, and what you'll bring better. You don't want to continuously explain the narrative and intro a new story to explain the why law school or what you'll bring to the school piece. I hope that makes sense. So the essays that I'm like, okay, this is super easy to read, super easy to understand. I'm not fighting through what's going on in the essay. Those are the ones where it really has one moving narrative that is hitting all the things that they need to hit. And where this stuff lies, the compassion, empathy, detail oriented, all of that stuff lies, should be incorporated in the narrative so that we know that you have those qualities, right? And that's not a separate conversation than the why law school and what you'll bring to the school or field. I think that's it, and it sounds a lot more difficult than it is. So this is where this question of what you want admissions to know about you comes into play. So when we pick a narrative story, many times we'll go to an experienced trauma, or a difficult time in your life, or something that you had to overcome. Those are great examples of, and it may show who you are. But many times people are talking about the event too much and not what came out of it. And what came out of it and your actions out of that event tells us a lot more about who you are. So when you pick a narrative, you really want to go into how did the event make you feel? What actions came out of it? And an example of what actions came out of it is, you know, for example, if you've experienced a extreme injustice in your life, the action can be, I decided to participate in an organization that helps people in a really tough spot. And I wanted to get on the ground, get my hands dirty, and understand where the injustice is happening. And what you've learned is X, Y, and Z. And therefore, taking what I've learned, I want to pursue a legal career. That is the action that's coming out of the event. Many times people get stuck in saying, this happened and therefore I was experiencing this injustice, and I just felt so like helpless and I couldn't do anything. Important story, but it doesn't tell us who you are, right? Can you take that story and push yourself out of it, and what are the actions that came out of that? So this is important when you pick a narrative, because the story that you want to tell may not be the story that you need to tell. And this takes a lot of convincing for a lot of people of, oh, I really want to tell this story. And when you hear someone say that about their personal statement, it's usually a story that they've been thinking about for the hook. And they haven't thought about that second piece of, okay, I need to connect it into a why law school or a, why that particular school kind of conversation. So the majority of times they will, when someone starts thinking about a personal statement, they're thinking about the story that might fit a hook, but might not fit the intent of the essay. And the intent of the essay is for people to get to know you. And usually that story isn't doing enough. And 95% of the time, we are cutting that first paragraph that people have thought about forever, about that hook, right, that people have thought about. So we are 95% of the time saying, get rid of it. It doesn't do anything for your essay. You don't even come back to it. So that's what I mean when you say pick a narrative. Don't pick one that you're just using for the first paragraph, because if we're throwing away the first paragraph on a story that you're never going to reference back as a point in your journey of explaining who you are, then why take up that space when you only have 2 pages to talk about yourself? So really, we want to be picking a narrative in that way. Any questions at this point? I know I'm talking a lot, but any questions?
Yeah, so I have a few. I know I'm the only one.
Oh, perfect. I love it.
but I guess we're gonna share the essay anyway, so the hell, I guess I'll just mention what I was thinking about writing.
Sure.
So I don't have like well, I do have a definitive kind of narrative, so to speak, and the connection. I COVID really didn't make me choose law school. A
Right.
lot of other kind of social events I'm not really gonna write about, just because I feel like it would be insensitive to write about, just because it wasn't the impact for me. The real impact for me was that growing up, I came from a family on the other side of the law. My father was in the Italian mafia. He got
Sure.
prosecuted for that, and as a result of him leaving that, well, I guess my family, it left my mother unable to attain any kind of legal services for alimony, for any family counseling, no enforcement for alimony if someone leaves the state to another state. So just all of that, and then I guess basically a lawyer not really having the emotional attachment to care and listen to their clients kind of made me want to become a lawyer. And that's how I would bring about the hook, I guess, so to speak, or the narrative to the why I wanted to be a lawyer, or to why I'm going into the law field. And then most people, I guess, everyone actually asks why you're going into law school. And most people say, my father, mother, or any career, like, why do you want to go into medical school? Well, my parents did this or that. A lot of my friends have said that answer. And for me, what I didn't want to follow what my father went into.
Sure.
So going from what that happened to that aspect. If that is, you think it's a good kind of narrative to write about.
Yes, there's a couple traps in that story. So and this is the first time speaking to you, so I know nothing about your history except for what you shared, so thank you for sharing that. I think the question is, number one, are you applying straight out of college, or have you had a couple years of a career?
No, so I went to Northeastern. I did undergrad. I got my master's in criminology,
Mhm.
uh, and then the whole point of that was that I wanted to go into the field to help people,
Sure.
not victims of that. But then I realized the criminal justice field not doesn't necessarily help the victims per se. It's a very kind of circular cash business where arrests are made for certain entities and all of that nature. So that's why I wanted to go into the legal field, to help directly more with victims.
Okay, so that tells me a little bit more about you. So, you know, I feel when you first told me the story about your father and how, your mother didn't have a lot of legal services available to her for alimony and all that, I'm like, okay, that's a very common story that's out there in terms of like like you said, parents were involved in the law in one way or another, which is triggering you to do something about it. Um, what's more interesting is that you've gone to school and gotten your master's, and the conclusion that you came to is that you want to help victims, right? That's a very different reason, for example, than why I want to go to law school. So I think that piece is interesting, and should be a little bit more of a focus that you can put on. The trap in your story is to say, this happened when I was very young, and you did not make the decision to go to law school when you were very young and never changed your mind about it, right? Like, that could be true, but still you are a adult making this decision to go to law school. So you don't want to say, oh, as a 5-year-old I decided to go to law school and I'm just following that. And that's a little bit of a ridiculous story. So I think your story
Yeah.
can, I grew up with this, I went to school for it, I realized the gap, which is the support for victims, and you relate to that because of your mother. That's still in the same narrative of your life, right? Like your life story of your family's involvement with the law, and say, that's the gap that I want to fill in my career, therefore I'm going to law school. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. That was one of the questions. So thank you. That I'll
Yeah.
definitely focus on the second ladder of that you mentioned. And
Sure.
then just, I don't want to take up too much of you guys' time, but for the admissions course, now I know that before someone else mentioned, I think Laura mentioned the review of the personal statement. Do I, what, I have a few schools that I'm interested in, and I'm not sure if it's just a personal statement and that's all that's necessary for that particular law school. So do I have to register for the course to find out those details, or is there a way, obviously, with payment and everything, it's tough, obviously. So is there ways to find that information out on like a one-on-one session that would be paid once? I just didn't know I guess how the admissions course went, or finding out information as.
So I am here every Wednesday to answer any admissions questions that you may have. So, this is part of the LSAT Unplugged course that is available to everyone that is part of LSAT Unplugged. So you can come in and ask questions about admissions every Wednesday if you would like. In terms of what the school is asking for, including letters of rec, optional essays, diversity statements, hardship essays, those should be available on each school's website. And you should be doing the due diligence for yourself to find out what essays need to be written for which schools. I don't carry a database. I know about super quirky optional essays that are out there, and can give you some insight into how to write those. But I or no one in the LSAT Unplugged staff is going to be doing that research for you. So you really should go on the website of each school and look at what they're asking for. Also in LSAC, when you create your account and you start adding schools to your list of schools that you're applying to, it should show up in there as well.
Okay. Yeah, I did go on each one and I did review to make sure
Sure.
additional or optional. So yeah, I wasn't asking for anyone to do that.
Sure.
I just didn't know that, by the time I'm sending in my application, then that's where it's stated, and it's not stated on the
Yeah.
website. That's all.
And also, I do encourage you to reach out to the admissions of the schools that you're looking to apply to. They are 99% of them are extremely friendly. They are willing to get on a phone call with you to talk through their application process. We've done interviews as LSAT Unplugged. We've done interviews, and they are the most friendliest people out there, and they want you to apply to their school. So there is no shame in asking questions. I do, especially for those optional kind of quirky essays. This has happened multiple times where we were looking at the prompt and I was like, well, there's two approaches that we can take for this essay, but I don't know which one is the right one. I don't know what the school is looking for. Go ask admissions, like email, call admissions, whatever you need to do, and ask them like, hey, what are you actually looking for in this essay? And they usually will give you an answer and say like, actually, we really want you to show us what you'll bring to the program. Or they'll say, hey, we actually want you to talk about how this is going to advance your legal career, and what programs you are actually really interested in. So kind of getting clarity around that is important as well, because you don't want to be answering a prompt incorrectly. So if you have questions around those optional essays, even personal statements, if you're like, hey, what are you guys actually looking for? You can ask those questions to admissions.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Perfect. Yeah, no, thank you. I'll definitely reach out. I have the list of schools, and then I guess next next time on this, I will hopefully have an update, and if I have any questions, I'll ask. But yeah, no, thanks. I didn't know, upon getting ready or upon taking the LSAT and then, going through the final application stage, that's where like the additional essays popped up that you guys, that's why I was more of just concerned about. But okay, yeah, I've gone on the websites and I've kind of confirmed that it's mostly just a personal statement. I don't even see an optional writing submission. So, okay, thank you.
You have to give you a warning that some schools, it's not optional writing either. It's like optional videos or, stuff like that. So there's some interesting optional stuff out there. With regards to essay reading here in this class, we do cover, a lot of times it's a lot of personal statement and diversity statement, but happy to look at addendas as well here. So if you want to send one into admissions at lsatunplugged.com, it will make its way around. Once we have probably a couple, I'll definitely do a essay reading, essay coaching class where we read current drafts in December. So if you want to join that, if not, we'll probably do one once a month. So hopefully you can send yours in to fit into one of those.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Anyway, going back to kind of structure, I mean, really, I know I talked a lot. I talked for 30 minutes straight. So, but this is really the structure that you're looking for. And, picking the right story can take a while. You may start with one and then we migrate over to another. But in general, this is the structure that you're looking at. When you write your draft, I am someone who says more is better. So I know I said the 2 pages for the personal statement, that's the kind of guidance that is out there. Some schools may have 3 pages, depending, but I say write more. We have a lot of stories. We have a lot of things that we want to talk about. So I say in that first draft that you're writing, don't be limited by that 2 pages. Actually, you should go over multiple pages. My personal statement, the first draft was 6 pages. Cut it down to 2, but you need to, I feel that it is important to get the stories that you want to talk about out there. I don't believe in fabricating a narrative to fit what you think others want you to write. I think there are stories that we really, really want to tell about ourselves and say, actually, this is really important to me to tell. And I think you should put it on paper. And once you put it on paper, you can say, oh, actually, that story doesn't translate the way that I want it to translate, or this actually lends itself to kind of talking more about who I am as a person. And it shows people what I'm good at. So you don't realize that until you've written it out. So I say, write it out. Don't worry about structure yet. It can all be fixed in the drafts that happen out of it. But in that first iteration, really just write out the stories and write out why law school, really be specific and write out, if you're writing for a specific school, write out why you're applying to that school, write everything. And then there's always a way to narrow it down, cut it down, pick the narrative that is important, but also working for you, and edit that way. So I think, yes, we're talking about structure, and the structure is important to ensure that your messages are getting across, but that first draft really should be a plethora of information and a plethora of like why law school and who you are on paper.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I wish you all the best and take care.